to the cloud.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Loudon Agile Network. We have with us today Noble Ackerman, who's going to be talking about the five pillars of calibrated trust. Noble has been working in the frontier of technology for many, many years. And, I had the pleasure of working with him when we were at a company called Ventera. And he was always ahead of what everybody else was doing. And in the last few years, Noble has made himself an expert in AI, and he's also has a lot of experience working with data trust. And in today's presentation, he's going to share insights and expertise on how to build agentic systems that enterprises can actually deploy. So, without further ado, please help me welcome our speaker for this month, Noble.
Thank you. Toby, first I want to thank you and thank the Lawton Agile Network, LAN, as we know it affectionately. Thanks for inviting me back to talk to this audience. I normally start with, asking how many people have deployed agents, but there are only a handful of people here. So if you want to sort of just in the chat, just throw what your agentic stack is, what technologies you use. If you want to share that, that would be awesome. Just that way, I learn. So I always start my talks with an assertion and my bias. My an assumption and a bias. My assumption is that everybody here knows what an agent is, right? You've at least encountered an AI before, a ChatGPT, or built your own thing. And my assumption is that these models and these agents and the things that we're used to are going to just continue improving, and they're going to be ambient in our lives. And if they're to be ambient, to me, they better be trustworthy and fair. And part of this talk is about that topic. My bias is that I am completely AI pilled. I have just given it up to Skynet. I know that these things are again ambient in our lives, and because of that, I want to be a good citizen of responsibly deploying, designing, developing, and not just deploying these to the market, but also sort of evangelizing the responsible way to deliver these tools. And agents are kind of all over the place in the news. We're almost sick of it. We're just talking before we joined the call. And so we'll try to make this exciting. So those are my assumptions and my biases there. Um, so I'm gonna look at what you guys posted in the chat, if anyone did. Six GPTs from Toby, and Toby was the only respondent. And I'm going to sort of give some bad news to start the talk. I'm going to say most AI agents fail not because of the awesomeness of the harnesses and the technology or the models, but because when we actually, assuming we're not deploying them for ourselves, when we deploy them for other employees or our customers, they often fail because of broken trust. And companies have invested millions of dollars in AI agents over the last 2 years, 48 months or so. And according to Gartner, about 88% of those projects will never reach production. Those of us who have been in machine learning and deep learning for years, that number seems eerily familiar to what we were learning about when we were doing time series analysis and logistic regression. But apparently it's still the same. The common thread, if I were to bet, is that these things are non-deterministic. They've always been they're not causal graphs, they're correlations. And so because they confidently hallucinate, we need to sort of calibrate, we just need to accept that they're not going to be perfect and then calibrate when we choose to be in the loop and then when we choose to be on the loop. So with that, I'm going to show you a framework that turns our POCs and our MVPs and our little experiments into production systems and by the end of this, hopefully you'll have everything you need to deploy your first trusted agent. Let's get started. To do that, Toby already introduced me, so I'm not gonna obsess about myself. I am gonna point you to a YouTube page because I post the most random and awesome things about where I think the tech is going. Toby mentioned that we work together, but what I don't think, Toby, you know, is that back in 2014, I was working with something called CNNs or convolutional neural networks for augmented reality devices. And so
I
technically,
remember that. I
I've
remember
been
that.
I've been in AI when it was called deep learning for a very long time.
Yeah.
I did a lot of natural language processing in 2016 with a smaller model called Spacey and then did some recommendation systems after that. And then I let my brain atrophy when I joined Toby at doing some health care things. So I wanted to learn new things. And because of that, when 2022 hit and I learned about this new thing called Midjourney, that was built on this thing called a transformer architecture. And then maybe a month later, GPT 3.0 or 3.5 launched. It completely blew my mind. And I had to sort of unlearn everything and relearn everything. So I guess one key thing two things that I'll leave you with. One, I'm obsessed with trustworthy systems or data trust by design. And then two, we're all learners. There are no experts. No one knows LLMs. You know, if you ever see a job description that tells you, hey, 10 years of LLMs, you know you're dealing with a scam artist, so don't join that company. All right. Looks like other folks are joining. All right. So what was the motivation? Oh, whoa. Oh, God. All right. So what was the motivation behind what I'm about to show? I wanted to sort of set it up. In 2024, I built one of the first agents that I've actually built. What I actually did was I had a bunch of tools. Every time there's a technology that comes around, in the US, we have the USPS Daily Digest emails that you can sort of sign up for. And because I'm lazy, I built a tool that searches my Gmail, identifies and classifies my mail based on the picture that showed up in the digest. And then I got a log of whether I need to go outside and go check the mail or whether it was just spam. And because of that, when agents came around, I actually used that tool that I built as a tool for the agents to orchestrate. And when I say agents, most people think, you know, ChatGPT agents or request response where you just type text and you get text back. I don't look at agents like that. I look at agents as, you know, event-based systems or service meshes even where they're just milling about your software and delivering value for you. And that's a very peculiar way to think about agents. So what you're looking at here was my home automation system that had that tool sort of render in real time using a technique called generative UI. And the idea was, hey, I've got my smart home, I've got APIs to it, it tracks my devices. Why not just show it on a dashboard and then have it scan my physical mail? The idea was super simple, automate the boring stuff. Sorry, the thing is so loud. So that was the promise of agents in my mind, you know, get all of the automate, like all the tedious, repeatable stuff automated so I don't have to worry about it. And this was 2 years ago. Today we have Claude Code, we've got Codex, we've got, you know, agents that we like Manus that we can sort of purchase and, you know, do a lot of that stuff better than what I was able to do with the technology that was available. And so I don't know who here has actually submitted an expense report in the last 30 days, right? I don't think anyone enjoyed that process. It is tedious, it is repetitive. It's just, we could just find better things to do, like go outside on a nice day like this. Well, experience reports to me are the perfect candidates for agents, right? It's repetitive, it's rule-based, it's time-consuming, it's universally hated. And if you do like expense reports, you can spam me on my YouTube comments later. Anyway, every step of this slide, every, reading receipts, categorizing expenses, filling out form, all of that stuff can be automated. The technology exists today with a local model, even if you want to, not, expose your agent to your Gmail like I did with the mail example. Okay, so the promise is real, it's achievable. So I built an expense report agent, and it completely almost destroyed me. And I'll show you what went wrong as sort of we sort of set this up. And what actually happened, well, almost, was because I caught it before submission, is that my agent scraped my inbox for receipts like it normally does. I normally will take a picture and sort of email it to myself, or if it has an actual email, it will sort of go through. So the agent spawns its sub agent and goes out and it sort of scrapes my inbox and it uses an LLM to categorize them because I don't want to have the time to build my own classifier. And then because everything is different these days, right? It's easy. LLMs do all the things and they're getting better. And then I have it auto submit to our expense system because I have access to the API. And full disclosure, I no longer have access to the API because of this disaster. What happened is that when I was developing it, I'm eval pilled. So I evaluate everything. I do offline evaluations as I'm developing. I do online evaluations when the thing is running. I had about 95% accuracy in testing, but that 5% error rate, that 5%, one of those errors was categorizing a Wayfair, those little furniture stores, a Wayfair furniture purchase confirmation as a team dinner expense. Okay. Know where this is going. So the agent couldn't explain why it made that decision because I didn't have anything to do that. I had no metrics on how often this happened, that little 5%, mind you. And there was no human checkpoint without submission. And critically, like there was no consequence limits, right? So the agent could submit any amount and when we talk about calibrated trust, that's something that will lead my users if I actually were to make this a product and become a billionaire. And I would never become a billionaire because you would have that mistake once, get embarrassed, and never use my tool. So you under trust, right? So I'll talk about the concept of under trusting and then over trusting, and then that perfect porridge in the middle is calibrated in that sense, right? So I'm in the manager with meeting with my manager, and then he pulls up the expense reports. I get a question like this on the right. What's up with this? And then I'm trying to explain, oh, it's the AI, they hallucinate. And that's not a good response. That's when I realized is that we're generally solving for the wrong problem. 95% accuracy sounds great until you realize that 5% can be catastrophic, especially when you're working like, high risk environments like, healthcare or banking and that kind of stuff. And so this failure mode teaches me what we need, that we need an entire framework. The accuracy is an important metric, and every single model maker will give you their benchmarks on how accurate the thing is becoming. And you've got the ELO score against a human. And that's great for them. But for agents, accuracy is not the metric we care about, and it is trust. Okay. So that's the preamble to a story that happened 2 years ago. Today, it looks like over the holidays of during December, everyone went home and heard about something called OpenClaw, which is just basically new types of agents that have come around and are doing awesome things. Well, with great, awesome power comes a lot of chaos, right? And so, since then, there have been CVEs and you know, claw agents or open claw agents accessing a bunch of vulnerable tools, through their MCP accesses, and these vulnerabilities are being actively exploited. There's also things called echo leak that allows zero-click data exfiltration between the AI presentation layer. And of course, if you're in this industry, you always hear it, like every day there's another exploit. Just a couple days ago, preparing for this call, Anthropic accidentally leaked the Claude code, source code, right? And so now you can imagine, I was talking to a friend about it, and they're like, "Oh, well, that's Anthropic's problem." It's like, no, because many enterprises have deployed Claude code as their agent of choice and is actually the industry leader. And so if I can exploit it, um, you know, I can probably do a lot of harm. So, you know, just keep that in mind. That's what's present. And we're measuring the wrong things. Which is why my assertion at the top of this was that our agents aren't getting deployed, right? Because they're not trustworthy. We're scared. That something bad is going to happen. So look at this table on the left. That's what we optimize for in our demos and POCs. But on the right, you know, it's trust, right? It's consequence acceptance. It's collaboration, for example, means where do humans fit in? Auditability means, can we prove this to a regulator if we're, in a regulated environment? Why the agent did, or can we explain it to our boss why a Wayfair order is being classified as a team dinner expense, And so that 95% accuracy, right, was a great demo, it was a great POC, and everybody loved it. But in production, 95% accuracy on an expense categorization means one in 20 expenses is completely wrong. It was like 400 receipts per month. That's 20 mistakes. And even one mistake at maybe $4,000 for a furniture order, you can sort of see how your accuracy metric is meaningless, right? And so what matters is, did we block the catastrophic errors? Did we audit what happened? Can a human intervene at the right moment? And so that's the misalignment on why Gartner claims that 88% of AI projects fail. Okay? I always sort of throw a thought experiment type equation in my talks lately, and today is no different. And so this is not a real math equation. It's just me sort of trying to explain calibrated trust. It isn't about building perfect agents. It's about building trust that matches the agent's capability and the AI model's capability. And that's out abstracted away from what you can do, right? So my expense report, right, should have had graduated trusts, right? That I'll explain. For expenses under $50, full autonomy, right? With gas nowadays, maybe I'll say that's $25. Um, because I trust it completely, right? If it makes a $25 mistake, that's on me. For $50 to $200, maybe I can say the agent for an expense report, that makes sense. Like an agent should act, but maybe notify me via Slack, or if I'm using OpenClaw via my Telegram or whatever, so that I can spot check it and say, yes, thumbs up, and then it continues. If it is over $200, the agent will propose a recommendation, but then it has to wait for my explicit approval. Right. That is calibrated trust, right? The trust level matches the consequence level, right? The impact of getting stuff really, really wrong, right? So if I, what I did, the mistake that I did with my expense report is that I built it with binary trust. Either you trust it with everything or nothing. And that's why my system failed. So basically, calibrated trust just means imperfection, these hallucinating models of things that are just not perfect, becomes a managed feature, right? It's not a hidden risk. So I'm going to sort of spend some time to sort of show you the architecture and what makes this possible. Okay. Every one of these failure these failures map to a missing pillar in the architecture. When I gave this talk initially, you'll notice I promised 5 pillars, and I still keep it at 5, but I've added a new failure mode. So it's not as poetic as I had it, like failures and 5 pillars. Let's fix this. All right. If I had any of these safeguards, right? Let me dissect what you're looking at on the screen. First, there was no source verification, which means the agent couldn't show why it categorized furniture as dinner. Okay. There was no grounding, no citations. Second, there was no performance metrics, right? And I didn't really know that this was the fifth time that it made a category error like that. I was just flying blind, right? The third failure value, I optimized for completion rate, right? Not for how expensive the errors could be or how impactful the errors could be, right? The fourth is my favorite, right? When I was working with Toby at Venterra, I spent most of my time with my colleagues in the design and user research side and tried to exchange ideas because the human checkpoint to me where the agent went straight, in my case, from categorization to submission without a human on or in the loop, and I'll explain that here in a second, was just a catastrophic fail. And then the fifth and final one, I'll talk about tool provenance in a second, was there was no consequence limit, right? So the agent could theoretically submit $1 million expense if it wanted to. And again, as I'm talking about this dumb expense report example, think about your use cases for your customers and imagine if I had any of these safeguards, right? Source verification would have been seen, right? Categorized based on keyword dinner found in email subject, blah, 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 blah. That's obviously wrong. With performance metrics, I would have caught that the pattern of furniture miscategorizing something in my offline evals or my testing. By the way, I use the word offline evals, and for the software nerds here, it's just basically unit testing, right? For your agent. All right. And then with consequence limits, the agent would have blocked anything over $500, as I explained before. And so any single pillar would have prevented the disaster. There's a new one, tool provenance, which is directly mapped to some of the newer vulnerabilities that we're seeing. And tool provenance is, you can't just trust NPM. This is where we get nerdy into sort of the security stuff, and I'm learning AI security. I guess we all are. Is that now with your NPM registry, you can actually sort of spoof the hashes that validate that a tool that an agent has access to, and so things are getting really, really skittish, right? And so if your tool is, let's say, an agent skill and you're using the Vercel agent.sh, for example, or you have an MCP and you do not understand the provenance of the tool, you're in for a bad time. Okay. So then how do we fix this? So these 5 pillars uh, essentially work together to create what I call calibrated trust. If you remove any one of these, the system breaks, right? And so just, I'm not going to sort of repeat what's on the screen. Well, I'll just sort of tie it back to my situation is like, you know, when you look at these pillars, transparency, success measures, value delivery, user experience, and consequence acceptance, the key insight here is that these pillars are not like in a series or sequential is the word. They're interconnected. They're interwoven with each other. Like transparency enables success measures because you can't evaluate what you can't inspect, right? Same with user experience, for example, right? Depends on the consequence acceptance before you design for different approval flows, hey, for high risk versus low risk, like I was giving an example before, right? So value delivery, another one, like matters because it takes about sometimes 8 months to build your thing, and your risk tolerance is different if it only takes you like a couple hours to vibe code something, learn from where you made a mistake, evaluate it, and then sort of ship it, right? So that we've the entire software development cycle I've been arguing for a couple months is completely gone, like we know it. We completely contracted everything with with the power of these coding agents, if that's what you use, or even on the design side, Figma is all AI now. All right, anyway, so I'm going to rebuild this expense agent that I built, and we're going to learn what I could have done better. And you'll see how each pillar um, manifests. I don't know how am I doing on time? Anybody know?
Yeah, we're doing good, Noble. It's 7:30.
Okay, so I've been rambling for 30 minutes. All right.
We still have 30 minutes.
25, so you're good.
Yeah, I'll try to target for like 15 more minutes on this so we can sort of take questions.
Sure.
So the first pillar is transparency. And I was talking about how your obsession about accuracy with these models is a fool's errand, right? Because these things are never going to be accurate. Not with the argue. This is a philosophical debate. I don't believe LLMs will ever be AGI. That's not a thing. We'll fight over it over beers. Um, so not about preventing errors. It's about making those errors debuggable. We'll say, okay. So if you're grounding your thing with RAG or LLM Wiki or whatever new thing that MCP, whatever it is, you want to just ground every decision in a verifiable source. Okay. The agents connect to, your company expense policy documents, and it can cite specific pages, and then you can sort of use some sort of grounding to sort of verify the legitimacy of each one that you put in there. So in this gray box, it sort of shows you that. And then on the tool provenance side, I just wanted to update this slide just to include, you want to know with a high level of certainty where your MCPs, your skills, if you have access to the CLI and your agents, you expose that to your agent if you're a developer, if that's actually ending up in the right place, what permissions it has. Do you have resource management there to sort of, circuit break if something goes wrong? So those are kind of things I would have needed to think about, right? And so if something was categorized as team dinner based on expense policy.pdf, on page 3, now I can sort of click on that citation, see that the policy says it's a team meals at a restaurant, and the agent is able to reason through it and sort of say, all right, well, this is not a dinner or this is a dinner. And so with transparency, when my manager someday asks, why did this happen, I have an audit trail of sorts, right? Ideally an immutable audit trail. Right. And so you can sort of show the reasoning, the sources, and exactly where the agent logic broke down. Okay. And that's sort of transparency is the foundation of trust, right? Because you know what is happening. Like me and you talking, and I'm sort of just hiding or, have my ball cap, my hat sort of covering my face. There's no transparency there. You don't trust me, right? So that's what we're talking about. All right. So, thought I redid this slide. Oh yeah, I promise you I'll talk about undertrusting and overtrusting. I'll run through this real quick. So, if we undertrust when a user don't believe the citation. So this thing just keeps, misclassifying furniture as team dinners, right? And even if it cited a source, also need to understand, did it interpret properly? But then from a human-centered design standpoint, you start thinking, well, it's now more work for your users to verify that the agent is not hallucinating or doing something crazy, right? And so that leads to undertrusting. On the flip side of that, you start over trusting when the user sees citations and then assume that it's correct, right? Because the thing is like almost right. We do this every time. We're guilty of this every time when we ask ChatGPT or whatever to write a report for us or do a deep research for us. I guarantee nobody here has read the full research paper, right? We just over trust it, and that's, not calibrated. Right. So transparency is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You also need to measure performance systematically, which brings us to the third pillar, success measures. All right. Another hot take. I've made a few hot takes. One, AGI is not a thing. Just math is going to get better, algorithms are going to get awesome, and models are going to get smarter, and we're going to find new ways to do it. That doesn't mean it's AGI. If you can define AGI, maybe you can. The other assertion that I'm going to make is that accuracy is a bullshit metric. It's a vanity metric. Nobody cares. What really matters is safety, faithfulness, and consequence-aware evaluation. Right. So in your AI framework or agent framework of choice, I use Vertex AI because I'm a Google developers expert. So I'm supposed to, at least once in a talk, I'm supposed to name drop Google so I can get credit. Vertex AI has something called Gen AI evaluation services that lets you measure what really matters, right? You can have your WAN-DB or Langfuse or Langsmith. You just need to measure, right? You need to do your evals. I've mentioned evals a few times, but more importantly, like the safety score tells you, hey, does it block inappropriate expenses even if it miscategorizes? And then faithfulness might measure, hey, is the reasoning actually grounded in cited sources? Remember from the transparency one? Is it hallucinating, for example? And then by tracking the metrics over time, the tool that I use, Vertex AI Experiments, can then, or your ML Flow, whatever you're using, can sort of see the agent getting better or worse, right, over time. I, and then you identify which types of errors you're seeing more or less of, the delta from that. Okay. So you can't really improve what you don't measure, I think is the phrase that we always hear, and you can't trust what you can't track over time, essentially. So these metrics give you the confidence to answer, hey, is the agent getting better at this task? But okay, and that's important, and that's success measures, and being able to sort of have the telemetry emitted to understand what's happening. But that measurement alone doesn't help if the system takes months to build. So as I mentioned before, AI has gotten to a point where we essentially just contracted the entire SDLC. I don't even think the software development lifecycle exists anymore, in my opinion. Maybe in sort of old-fashioned, you've got your gray beard programmers that don't want to touch a Codex or Cursor or whatever, and Godspeed on them. I'm going to use Claude Code and Gemini CLI or whatever. But I use Agent Development Kit. I use Codex. I use pretty much all of the tools. I don't even use an IDE anymore. I don't remember the last time I opened Visual Studio, right? With Microsoft Agent Framework or ADK or LangGraph, tools compose automatically. You can define what tool does what. The agents orchestrate. You can sort of use things like agent skills to sort of help accelerate your development cycle. And this radically changes the risk equation, in my personal opinion. This is actually the most controversial slide, right? When you're building the traditional way, you say, hey, I need, 95% plus accuracy, your 10 nines, whatever, before even considering deployment because the iteration was too expensive, right? You had designers needed to do something, and we claimed we were agile, right? We're in LAN after all. We claimed we were agile, but designers had to do their thing. User research had to do their thing, hand it off. We had to sit in our agiles, our sprint planning, treat our developers like toddlers, and just have them explain what we're going to build. Like the point is today AI completely changes the risk equation. It's not expensive anymore to develop, okay? And so I needed 95% accuracy before, if back in the day, to deploy each bug fix was a couple days of work. We use t-shirt size and all that stuff. With my Codex tool, with my Claude Code, my Gemini CLI, whatever, I just iterate, right? My designers iterate, right? We work together. Where I was able to deploy that expense report agent at 85% accuracy and then iterated daily and found the categorization issue. So if I were to do that today, I would do the same cycle, right? I will fix the issues in 20 minutes, just hit OK, continue, or whatever the button says. Just replace the entire keyboard on here with just the return key because that's all I do anymore. I'm not saying I vibe code. There's a lot that goes into what I do, but you get the idea, right? The point is the fast feedback loop means that I can afford to start with a lower accuracy and improve as I iterate that loop and get users to give me feedback at a rapid pace, right? So you came in thinking this was an agent talk, and what you actually got was what agile looks like today talk. And yeah, so I'll sort of leave it there. I think I'm running out of time. All right, so speed is not just a nice to have, it is fundamental to trust building. Fast iteration lets you start conservatively, gather real data, adjust, ideally your data coming from the users. But then there's also the users, right? The human in the loop, human on the loop. All right. So the $45 or $50 Uber receipt, right? Fully autonomous. I explained this before. If it gets to, if it's 80 some odd dollars, the agent submits it and I get a Slack notification I can review it. But, if it is something more than that, I need to be able to sort of review it, right? So that's when I sort of graduate the calibration of my trust level based on the impact of it going horribly wrong. There's somebody in my yard that shouldn't be in my yard, and it's throwing me off. Um, okay, I'll deal with that later. So yeah, essentially, human in the loop doesn't always mean okay. Now we have governance, right? Because say, for example, if back in the day you would get, your SRE or your DevOps would get like a notification because they're on call, PagerDuty would sort of ping them at 2 a.m. in the morning. That is human on the loop. Just alert me, I'm going to sleep. Agent is going to handle it. You don't even have to alert me, right? If it found an anomaly in your thing. However, again, if the impact is a little bit higher, then you have a human in the loop, thus sort of improving that. And the idea here is we need to just be realistic that as AI is automating things, the noise gets louder, right? And so uh, calibrated trust helps you sort of filter out the signals in how you design it. All right. Almost landed here. And so pillar five, the last pillar, is to me the ultimate safety net, right? So even if transparency fails, even if the metrics miss an edge case, even if your UX process has a bug and you didn't properly graduate it for a human to be in the loop, the mandate that this sort of creates, consequence acceptance creates, prevents catastrophic damage. Meaning the agent can be wrong, but if it can't be dangerously wrong, right? And so this is consequence acceptance by design. I should probably explain that a little bit better. So look at the constraints that I'm sort of looking at right here, right? At a max, single expense is $500, right? Hard limit, right? If the agent tries to submit 501, the mandate runtime blocks it, or that's what's supposed to happen. The daily total right here, $1,000, right? So even if the agent tries to submit two $600 expenses, it fails. The second one fails, right? So allowed categories are explicitly listed and tagged properly. Furniture is not on the list for my case anymore. And so now I don't have any fear because my agent runs within these constraints. And they're not suggestions, they're like boundaries enforced by my runtime. Okay. And if you are curious as to how that works and you want to work with Leidas, I lead all of agentic work, basically go to market and design for agent. And would love to work with you if you are an agency, for example. Please reach out. Okay. So let's sort of just look at the architecture together. These again, five pillars are not sequential, as I mentioned before, they're sort of woven together. Each component, I think, just reinforces each other. Every step is logged, every tool is traced, and every decision is auditable, right? So when I ask, submit my expenses, my agent orchestrates the entire flow. Transparency pulls the policy through my RAG engine or whatever I want to use. Um, my model reasons through the categorization, citing the sources. Success measures tracks the decision in an evaluation framework. UX determines the expense is a certain amount, so it requires me to be in the loop versus on the loop. And then Slack notification appears, right? And I approve. Consequence acceptance verifies against that mandate that I just talked about. Hey, my amount is under $500. The category is allowed. Vendor isn't forbidden. And then, however you want to do it, if you want to sort of use an extension to A2A like AP2, you can sort of create a payment mandate or code it yourself or reach out to me and I can sort of help you. Or go to my YouTube. You probably find it there. Okay. This is what calibrated trust looks like in production. It's not a magic component. It is an architecture where all of these primitives, these five, work together. If you remove one, everything falls apart. All right. I'm going to skip this slide. This is beating a dead horse. The poor horse is dead. Um, I'm going to skip this slide as well because that horse is just dying. And I'm just going to leave you with this checklist, right? Um, I've reviewed at this point dozens of agent deployments at various companies. And the pattern is the successful ones essentially check all of these five boxes. The failed ones skipped a step, right? And remember with our Agile 101, some of you are safe practitioners, you can't scrum your way to things. You can't skip steps. You can do it if you trust your team, but AIs are not people, right? And so hopefully that made sense. I don't know. I'm riffing here. I'm not going on script. So if you can't check these boxes, you have an experiment that works great for a demo, but as you move to production environment where real people rely on it, it will fail miserably. And so use this checklist. It's yours. Take a screenshot right now. Okay. Oh, I had animations. I forgot I did that. Cool. Um, just for this audience, this is a new slide. Deploy, conservative, iterate fast. Feedback loops are still your friend in the AI era. Consequence acceptance bounds the blast radius for failures. And, you know, was Agile 101, working software over docs. This is where you can find me. None of these links matter. Just go to this thing. I need 500 of, I guess 200 more people to make my 500 so I can actually take my dreams as being a YouTuber seriously. I want to become like Mr. Beast.
I like that, Noble.
So, hopefully you enjoyed this completely unscripted diatribe.
Thank
Good,
you
and we
so
have so much time. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Noble. Great presentation. Thanks so much. We enjoyed a lot. At this time, we'll open the lines for question and answers. There are very few people. If you want to unmute yourself, please come off camera. Come on camera and unmute yourself and ask questions.
I can do your on the camera part. Well,
Hello.
quick question for you. So you mentioned ADK. Okay, so that's a Google tool, right? Uh,
You can
I
use it, by the way, you can use any tool. I just happen to use that one.
no, I'm actually mostly curious, right? I know, for example, there's a lot of other solution, and I was just curious what your experience has been with, for example, Crew AI, LangGraph, AutoGen, Small Agent. I mean, there's a ton of them. So that's why I'm curious.
So Crew AI was one of the first. either small agents or crew AIs to compete for the first agentic systems that I built. Actually, I'm going to say something very unpopular. My preferred agent framework is to roll it my own, a while loop.
Okay.
I
I was
start
wondering.
there. Yeah, I start there. And as abstractions become a requirement, then I choose the right framework that satisfied most of my missing abstraction that I don't want to have to vibe code or code myself the artisan way to support. So I'm going to cheat with my answer and say it depends
No, it's
on
good.
what you care about, but always start with just regular while loops.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why for example, should we do up and close, for example, is based on pi, right? Uh, and the reason it's based on pi is because bash is all you need, right? Tool calling is basically bash,
Right.
right? And it works. It's still very strange to me, but it works.
And to be honest, the reason why I use Claude Code and Gemini, like look at Claude Code.
Hmm.
What tools does Claude Code have access to? It seems so magic when it does all the things. It has access to maybe four key tools: grep, glob, fetch, and maybe one other thing, right? So that's literally it, right? And the model is doing all of the work,
Yeah,
right? And
some
so
people.
starting simple and then adding complexity is always your friend. And of course, evaluating and trying to understand your failure modes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of the nice thing for me, at least, with anti-gravity, right? It's basically exactly the same thing, but you can really follow the reasoning, and following the reasoning uh, makes life a little bit easier. Because I actually built an autogen, right? I built one, and I was like, I'm gonna use Crew AI, and I'm gonna use Olama, and I'm gonna let it run for hours, and I don't care. I don't pay for tokens this way.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's
right.
the failure case are always the worst one, because it's like, oh, the LLM said yes, but you didn't tell me how to parse the LLM
Yeah.
properly, and you're like, you basically you spend 5 hours generating code, and at the end, all I have is a failure state.
That's right. And that's another reason why I've never deployed. I follow our conversations on our little private chat, Marshall, and I'm just jealous because I've not had a chance to play with any clause yet. Whenever I hear that, I'm wondering like what use case that I would use to justify the level of complexity just to get started. And
Yeah, I know.
so, and then of course, do I have the compute locally to do that? That's a different matter. But yeah, I always start simple, and then sort of layer in levels of complexity as I need.
If you want to try something simple, I'll tell you, I really prefer Hermes agent. It's from New Research, right? To OpenClaw, because OpenClaw is great, but you're right. CVEs. I did a blog post recently because I deployed it in the most secure method possible,
Yeah.
right? And now I actually have Hermes agent running, and this one doesn't break every 2 hours.
Mm, mm,
And it's actually very simple to deploy. And if you don't want to have to worry about spinning up your own infra, just spend a $20 on Olama to get their cloud models. And then you'll get an agent running literally in 20 minutes. Just do it in a container, right? Or a VM, so that it doesn't have access to stuff you don't want it not to have access to. Uh, and then it works.
Thank you. Yeah, by the way, everyone here, I learned so much from just lurking on certain channel, like just listening to Marshall talk. Like he's a nerd's nerd. Like I want to be like you when I grow up, and I have gray beard, so maybe I don't have that much time.
Don't have
Not.
gray hair, so yeah. I still can't figure out where's the camera button. Otherwise, I would be on camera. The camera button should be on Zoom, but it's hidden for some reason.
Yeah,
No,
they've
no problem.
changed some things with Zoom.
Oh, here it
I
is.
was telling earlier. Yeah. So, yeah, they've Sometimes advancement is not always good if you don't tell your customers what you did, you know.
I had to close the chat for that to pop up for a second. So
Yeah.
super weird. Uh,
Okay.
Any other questions? I
I
have
have, you mentioned, go ahead, Noble.
no. I was listening to your question.
Yeah. So I was, you mentioned at least twice or perhaps thrice that um, the traditional or the Scrum or Kanban ways of developing software are gone. And what I heard you say is that if you were estimating stories and building them the way you did, you're already outdated. And I hear you. I would love
Hold
to
on.
hear from you.
Before the premise of your question is, I don't believe I said Scrum and Kanban are gone. I said
No, no, no. That's why I corrected myself. What
the software
the
development
essence
life cycle is gone.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
got it.
Yeah, sorry. I
The traditional
probably misspoke
SDLC.
that.
yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah,
I can
no
erase,
problem. There's a
but yeah, yeah.
distinction there because I
Yeah,
use
yeah. I know.
Kanban. My agents
I know.
use Kanban to
Oh
develop
yeah,
today.
yeah, yeah. What I
Ooh,
meant
I
is
didn't add that to
tra
mine. Ooh, I
traditional
like that.
SDLC is gone, you know? So
Right, right. Sorry, I had to nitpick on that one. But go
no,
ahead,
no, thank
please.
you. And you don't want to be on camera saying Agile is dead because yeah. Anyway.
I did that already.
So
I think that was my last talk at sorry, go ahead.
so traditional SDLC is gone, and of course, so I think many organizations are going through this struggle where you still have human beings coding and you also have agents coding, and they kind of work together, right? The human in the loop, on the loops you talked about. My question to you is, how did that transition work for you? And how is the planning um, happening today? Because the challenge that I'm facing personally with my teams is that we started using, last maybe 2 months or so, right? Agentic AI doing the work, but we find ourselves doing a lot more validation. We don't still have a very good hold on um, how fast the agent can actually develop something. Sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's slower. And it's slower because maybe our prompt wasn't the right one, or the Claude skills it was using, it needed some updates, or because we are using a legacy system and we did not give it enough breadcrumbs for it to understand, right? Multiple reasons. So how, like how long does it take for a team to get a good rhythm of saying, okay, here's what we want to do, here's how the specs should be, and then our agent is going to be able to build this in an hour or 2 hours? It takes some experimentation, right? And I know it's a loaded question.
Um, so what you're describing, I think I call it the validation tax,
Hmm.
right? And anyone who tells you it disappears is selling something,
Yeah.
right? Um, Let me think about this. So I'll sort of give you my experience. 6 weeks before a team finds its rhythm, what we use is like storming,
Yeah.
norming,
Yeah.
forming, whatever. I
Yeah.
can't remember the
Performer.
phrase.
Hmm.
But 6 to 8 weeks, we are trying to find our rhythm. It's not linear. Weeks 1 through 3 is chaotic. We're trying to figure out people don't have access to their stuff. They're trying to
Hmm.
figure out how Claude code works. They're learning to write their own agents, like agreeing on where the agent.md file was going to live and how to share knowledge and do we share prompts. And speaking of prompts, prompt engineering died like 3 years ago as well. So now the breadcrumbs that you're talking about is throwing Claude or so I forget some of these other tools not coming to my head right now, but basically just throwing repo maps and skill definitions and even your acceptance criteria that the agent can verify itself against as those breadcrumbs, as you put it. And then you mentioned legacy systems. Like in my case, those are the hardest case. There's an entire industry around that. I know ThoughtWorks has Mechanical Orchard that
Yeah.
literally goes and just sort of changes COBOL into stuff with AI. But your instinct, Toby, is right, right? The agent is only as good as the context that it has, the breadcrumbs. And so I would invest in, providing it, put this in your GitHub or your GitLab, your agent.md, that is basically your architecture document before you expect any velocity,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
And so that's sort of
Yeah.
the thing. Stop
Yeah.
estimating stories in points. That's another thing. Stop estimating stories in points. Start estimating, in my opinion, with a verification service surface, right? How hard is it to prove that something was done correctly? Use the calibrated trust checklist as one of those release criteria, right? Or
Yeah.
definition of ready, right? I could go on and
Yeah.
on and on.
Absolutely.
Kanban
Yeah. No.
still works. Whip limits, in my
Oh, yeah,
opinion,
absolutely.
matters
I,
more.
I misspoke earlier. Don't punish me.
It matters more than because an
I know.
agent will flood your review
Yeah.
queue, as you were mentioning, in
Yeah.
an hour, right?
Yeah.
And
So,
so Kanban is probably one of my biggest
yeah.
unlocks with
So
agents development.
my teams, we are going through this transformation, obviously. So we're moving away from Scrum, and we like Kanban, but we still need some rhythm across the organization because we have bi-weekly demos where, all the leadership and all the teams present, et cetera, et cetera. So we are moving to a Scrumban model. In fact, Minakshi and I had presented on Scrumban many years ago. So I think Scrumban is making a comeback, as opposed to just vanilla Scrum. So that's
Hmm.
an interesting thing that we're seeing.
And I think I'm going to steal this phrase. I think I credit you for this for some reason. It's good that it's Scrum Bon. At least it's not Scrum Butt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That seems like a Tobyism to me. So I'm just going to give you credit for
Oh,
it.
by the way, Agile is a Tobyism. AI plus Agile, the name of this
That's
organization. Yeah.
AI Agile. I was
Yeah.
calling it AI Agile, but
Yeah.
Agile. I
Yeah.
see what you did
AI
there.
Agile. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome. So great. Thank you so much, Noble. Thank you, everybody. Small group, cozy, but we had very good talks.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Yeah,
Appreciate that.
thanks, Noble. Thanks, everyone, for joining. And please make sure you sign up for our next session, which will be on May 7th, where we will have Shivanku Mishra, who will come and present on scaling AI. He will share lessons from the largest world's leading pharma distributors. So make sure you come join us and participate in the activity. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Awesome.
Bye bye.